This is part 2 of a 3-part video series on slicing the matched bookend sides and backs for guitars and other string instruments using the bandsaw and the Accu-Slice system. In part 1 of this video series on slicing the backs and sides for guitars, I described the Accu-Slice system, its setup, and its operation. In this part 2 of the video series, I'll be describing the slicing of these matched bookends that can be used for the sides of guitars. I'll be starting out with boards that are 5 inches wide by 32 inches long, and from these I'll be cutting these panels about 125 thousandths inch thick. And I'll be cutting these from a variety of different woods, including cherry, Padauk, Wenge, Walnut, and maple. I will evaluate several bandsaw blades to determine which size is optimum for slicing these boards. Finally, after cutting the boards, I'll run them through a board sander to determine how much wood needs to be removed from both surfaces of the boards to remove all the bandsaw blade marks that was left on the board surfaces. In part 3 of this video series, I use these same techniques to slice the matched bookend backs for guitars. After I completed these 3 videos on slicing the book matched panels for guitar backs and sides, I summarized the results of what I learned in a 4th video entitled Lessons Learned and Tips for the Accu-Slice System. Here's a list of the topics that will be discussed and demonstrated in this video. It includes lessons learned during the production of these 3 videos, plus additional tips from many of my previous project videos. I'm ready to cut this piece of walnut to make some guitar sides. And the first thing I do is I set my gauge to 0 as a starting point. And then I move it until it just touches the bandsaw blade, move it back, and I'll advance it a little bit to make an initial cut. And the purpose of this first cut is just to remove an outer surface here to give me a nice parallel surface from which to cut the remaining boards. Because I want this first cut to give me a nice flat parallel sides, and then every subsequent cut to that will be perfectly straight and parallel to that cut. So I lock in my coarse adjustment knobs, lock my table to the bandsaw table with the mag jig clamps. I can lower my blade guide a little bit here. Don't lower it too much because I want to be able to see what we're doing. Usually I take it down pretty low. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'll be cutting slowly. The slower you cut, the smoother the cut. So what you're trying to do here is use that bandsaw blade to actually plane the wood as you're cutting it. So this is a 10 teeth per inch, 1/2 inch wide blade, and I'm cutting this walnut board and cutting very slowly. What I'm showing here is the actual speed that I normally cut when I'm slicing these boards. As I said, it's a very slow process. The slower you cut, the smoother the cut. And later in the video, I'll speed it up so you don't waste a lot of time watching me cut this board. This first piece I cut off is scrap. I just created a flat surface on the larger walnut board from which all subsequent slices will be perfectly parallel. So now I'm ready to start cutting my guitar sides. I want my sides to be probably, say, 1/8 of an inch. And the way I do this is, first of all, I release my mag jig clamps. I know my blade kerf is 50 thousandths. Each revolution on my index wheel is 50 thousandths of an inch. So 1 revolution, that's my blade. And then each revolution would be 50 thousandths. So 1 revolution, that's 50 thousandths. 2 revolutions, 100 thousandths. And then 1/2 revolution would be 125 thousandths or 1/8 of an inch. Lock my mag jigs in place. Now we're ready to start cutting our sides for guitars. This video is being viewed at 8 times the actual speed of cutting. As I described earlier, the slower you cut, the smoother the cut. In addition, by cutting slowly, you allow more time for the sawdust to clear from the gullets in the bandsaw blade. This will enable you to use a finer tooth blade than you would normally use for cutting these wide boards. Okay, here's our board off the bandsaw. Let's see what the measurements are on it. 123 thousandths, 125 thousandths, 125 thousandths, 126 thousandths, 127 thousandths, 125 thousandths, 126 thousandths. Okay, I'm going to mark these so I know that they're book matched. I'm going to call this, 1, and this will be 2 here. So 1 and 2 should be a book match set. So for the next board, once again, I release my mag J clamps, 1 revolution for the kerf of the blade, and 1, 2, 2.5. And then I lock my mag jig clamp. Okay, let's see what that measures up at. 129 thousandths, 128 thousandths, 127 thousandths, 126 thousandths, 127 thousandths, 128 thousandths, 129 thousandths. So you can see the boards are reproducible, they're parallel, side to side, back to front to back, top to bottom, and also reproducible from one board to the next. So here's our set of book match boards. And you can see how they match up. Now what I usually do after every couple cuts is I clean out the slot on the rail. And I did dust off the table to get rid of the excess sawdust, because what happens is sawdust can build up in this rail and it causes the bearings to get clogged up. I continue to slice some additional boards, some at 100 thousandths inch thick and others at 125 thousandths thick, until all the board was used up. Okay, I have my 2 boards I cut that are 125 thousandths inch thick. So let's see how much we have to cut off these. I'd like to get them down to maybe 110. So I got plenty of thickness. I can cut off 15 thousandths. I should get them perfectly smooth. I'm sanding both sides of the walnut panels. I'm sanding off about 3/1000 of an inch with each pass through the board sander. Well, those boards came out exactly 110 thousandths. Running those through a second time at the same setting took another 5 thousandths off. So it looks like that's a good setting. Cutting boards to 125 thousandths and then passing it down through here to get it down to 110 thousandths is pretty good. And they're perfectly smooth. And that needs minimal hand sanding to clean it up. Now in cutting those walnut boards, I did get some gumming up with the blade. This was a brand new blade when I started. It was 10 teeth per inch, and I cut about 12 cuts with this blade, and it is gumming up. Let me show you how I clean it up. I clean it up pretty easily. And what I'm doing, I have a rag here. I'm going to spray some WD-40 on it, and then just wipe the blade. Going down, pushing the blade. And that does clean it up. Well, you can see there how I cleaned it up. I prefer using this. I've tried wire brushes and stuff in the past, and they tend to dull the blade, so this would not dull the blade. This board is a cherry board. Cherry board's about 800 thousandths inch thick, and I did mount it on this MDF piece of wood with some 100 thousandths inch thick spacers. So the board is 32 inches long by 5 inches high, and it's glued onto this about 33 inch long piece of MDF, which again is over 5 inches tall. So the blade I'm using here is a 10 teeth per inch, half-inch wide blade, and I'll be cutting pretty slowly so as not to gum up the blade. So I said this is 10 teeth per inch, which is kind of a pretty fine blade for this with the wood, but this is cherry, it's pretty hard, it should not gum up, it should be fine. I followed the same procedures that I used for the walnut board. First of all, I cut off a scrap piece about 20 thousandths of an inch thick, and then I sliced the remaining panels each 1/8 of an inch thick. And there's our two boards book matched. I'm going to go ahead and mark these 1 and 2. So the two surfaces that actually exactly opposite one another. And you can see that they are book matched. And you can see the surface I got in there, it's pretty smooth. 125 thousandths, 126 thousandths, 126 thousandths, 127 thousandths, turn it to the other side, 125 thousandths, 125 thousandths, and 28 thousandths, and 126 thousandths. So that's accurate between, 125 thousandths plus or minus, 1 or 2 thousandths. Okay, I have my board sander set to about 1/8 of an inch board thickness, and I'm starting out with boards that are right around 1/8 of an inch thick. So I'm seeing how much they take off to get rid of these minor saw marks. And the saw marks are minor. You can see on there, there's not a whole lot of saw marks. Once again, I'm sanding both sides of the cherry board panels, and I'm sanding off about 3/1000 of an inch with each pass through the board sander. Notice that I'm remarking the numbers on the panels so I can keep them in the same order that they were sliced off the bandsaw. Okay, that came out pretty good. That second side, the only marks I see on it are actually the marks from the sanding paper. On the first side, I need a little bit more taken off. There's a few minor grits here. So let me take another 1/8 of a turn off this side. And what I just did is I took the boards through the board sander once again to allow for any variation in the board sander. So what I did is I ran them through once, reversed the board 180 degrees, and ran them through a second time. So actually they were run through at the same setting on the board sander 3 times. And it took off a little bit more. These boards all in all measure about 115 thousandths, 116 thousandths. All the way around, end to end, side to side, and even from board to board. So that came out good. So again, I was saying if I cut the boards to 125 thousandths, allow at least 10 thousandths for sanding. So I got boards here to 115 thousandths thick, which is probably still a little bit too thick. I might be a little bit thinner. But that's all I needed to get those surfaces perfectly smooth. Hand sanding will take care of the rest. So that was cherry boards, 5 inches by 32 inches long, and those were cut with a 10 teeth per inch, 1/2 inch wide blade. And I got a little bit of gumming up on the blade, but not much. So here's the blade after cutting that, 5 cuts with the 10 teeth per inch blade on that 5 inch thick piece of cherry. And a little bit of gumming up on the blade, but not too much. I just changed the blade to an 8 teeth per inch blade. I cut the cherry board and the walnut board with a 10 teeth per inch 1/2 inch blade, and I got a little bit of gumming up of the blade with that 10 teeth per inch. I think this 5 inches is a little bit too much for a 10 teeth per inch blade. So I switched it to an 8 teeth per inch. Again, it's a 1/2 inch wide blade, and I'll be working on this maple board now. Again, for guitar size, it was 5 inches by 32 inches long. Once again, I followed the same procedures as I did previously for cutting the cherry and walnut boards. First of all, cutting off a 20 thousandths inch thick scrap board, and this gives me a flat surface so that all subsequent cuts will be perfectly parallel to the surface. After that, then I sliced off panels, each 125 thousandths inch thick, and I continued to cut these panels until the entire board was cut. Okay, I just finished cutting those boards, and I cut 4 boards 0.125 inches thick. I cut 6 boards 100 thousandths inch thick, and then I cut 2 boards 50 thousandths inch thick, and the final board is 25 thousandths thick. Now, these smaller boards I may be using to make some purfling or some banding. These others I'll be using mainly for guitar sides, I think. But this blade, this 18th per inch blade definitely worked better. I got no gumming up at all on this blade, so it's perfectly clean. So that probably is a better blade. Usually anything over like 4 inches, I recommend going to an 18th per inch blade. And these boards are 5 inches, so 18th per inch blade will work. I will be doing a Padauk board next. I do expect that board to gum up the blade because it is a gummier wood. But for doing the maple and the cherry and the walnut, the 18th per inch blade is probably a better choice. Now the 18th per inch blade did give us a little bit rougher cut. Look at this. This is the one of the 1/4 inch boards. So it's a little bit rougher than the 10th per inch, but that'll smooth out. So let me run this through the board planer and see how much we need to take off to get it to the final thickness. I used the same process as done previously, sanding off 3/1000ths of an inch with each pass through the board sander and sanding both sides of the boards. And those boards all vary between like 107 thousandths and 110 thousandths. So basically 110 thousandths, just like the walnut and cherry boards. After cutting those 13 maple boards with this 18th per inch blade, I got no gumming up at all. So that's definitely a better blade to use for 5 inch wide boards. Next I'm slicing up a Padauk board, 5 inches wide by 32 inches long by 2 inches thick. I once again sliced off a 20,000th inch slab to produce a flat surface from which all subsequent cuts will be perfectly parallel. I then sliced 1/8 inch thick panels from this Padauk board. The Padauk wood does produce more of a mess from all the orange sawdust. As a result, it is necessary to clean the channels in the rail as well as the roller bearings on the carriage frequently. I also observed some minor smoking while cutting the Padauk board, but the board surfaces were free of any burn mark. Well, I was able to cut 10 boards and 125 thousandths inch thick, and that last board I cut off was 50 thousandths inch thick. But I was getting a lot of smoking as I was cutting along. The blade is definitely getting dull. I'm not getting gumming of the blade. The blade's in good shape, much better than the 10 per inch blade was after cutting those walnut boards. So that's in pretty good shape, but it is gumming up, so I just assume the blade is just getting dull. I think this Padauk is just chewing up the sharpness of the blade. But I'm not getting any major burn marks. It's getting a little bit dark here on this one edge, but not too bad. Usually when you start getting shadowing or darkness, that indicates the blade's getting dull, but this is not too bad. A little bit of shadowing, but not much. So I did get, I got 10 boards, 1/8 of an inch thick, and 1/50 thousandths. Let me run these through the board sander and we'll clean them up. Once again I sanded off 3/1000ths of an inch off each surface of the Padauk boards with each pass through the board sander. Here are the surface on the 2 Padauk boards before and after sanding. The top board is before sanding and the bottom board is after sanding. I started out with boards that were 120 thousandths of an inch thick. After sanding the boards, they were 100 thousandths inch thick. So I ended up sanding off 10 thousandths off each side of the board for a total of 20 thousandths off these Padauk boards. I glued this Wenge board right to the bottom edge of the MDF sacrificial fence. I did not use any of the thin spacers used for some of the previous boards. Afterwards, I'm sanding the bottom edge of both the MDF sacrificial fence and the Wenge board on my edge sander to get a perfectly flat and level surface. This sanded surface will also be perfectly perpendicular to the MDF sacrificial fence, so that it will ride smoothly on the bandsaw table without any binding. And all the purpose it has to this board now will run flat along the bandsaw table and won't bind. So now that the surface is sanded flush, put it against the carriage, and then with it flat against the table and against the carriage, I'm going to clamp it in place. carriage and make sure it rides on a table and doesn't bind. So it rides but doesn't bind. So then I'll drill my holes and screw it in place. I'm pre-drilling all 10 of the holes for the screws and then attach a sacrificial fence to the carriage with the 3/4 inch wood screws. I can remove the taps. And it should slide pretty right on the surface of the bandsaw table. Once again, I sliced the 1/8 inch thick panels off the larger Wenge board using the same process and procedures that was used for the previous boards. I just did one thing more too. I put these supports under the end of the rails. And just a piece of the vacuum on the bottom, rubber thing on the top, just a nice tight fit. And that reduces any sag that might occur in the rail, but more than that, it reduces vibration or oscillation. So it should get a little bit smoother cut. And I just did that in the last couple of boards, and it does seem to be a little bit better. Anytime you can reduce vibration or oscillation, that definitely helps your cut. So this is something I showed in a very early video on doing long boards with the Accu-Slice system. It does seem to work. I usually use this on rails over 6 foot long. This is only 5 foot long. But even at 5 foot, it seems to help a little bit. Well, I was able to cut exactly 10 boards, 125 thousandths inch thick from that one board, and I cut right down to the glue lines. I cut every bit off of that board, so I didn't lose nothing. So now let me run these through the board sander to see how much you need to take off to get them flattened. I sanded the boards through the board sander, as was done previously. I started out with boards that were 120 thousandths inch thick. After sanding, the boards were 110 thousandths inch thick. Therefore, I needed to sand 10 thousandths off each of the board surfaces to remove the bandsaw blade marks. In this video, I sliced match bookend guitar sides from 5 inch tall by 32 inch long blocks of wood. I sliced about 30.125 inch thick and a dozen 0.100 inch thick panels from a variety of woods including maple, walnut, cherry, Wenge, and Padauk. The resulting sliced panels were perfectly flat and parallel, edge to edge, top to bottom, to within plus or minus 0.02 of an inch. Cutting multiple boards to the same settings likewise produced boards that were reproducible and accurate in thickness. The 10 teeth per inch by 1/2 inch wide blade did result in some gumming up of the bandsaw blade when slicing the walnut and cherry boards. I switched to the 8 teeth per inch by 1/2 inch bandsaw blade when slicing the maple, Padauk, and Wenge boards, which resulted in no gumming up of the bandsaw blade. Finally, after slicing the boards, I ran them through a board sander to determine how much wood needs to be sanded off to obtain a finished smooth surface on both sides of the panels. I determined that between 7 thousandths and 10 thousandths of an inch need to be sanded off each surface or face of the sliced boards in order to remove any bandsaw blade marks from the surfaces of the sliced boards. After I completed these 3 videos on slicing the book match panels for guitar backs and sides, I summarized the results of what I learned in a 4th video entitled Lessons Learned and Tips for the Accu-Slice System. Here's a list of the topics that will be discussed and demonstrated in this video. It includes lessons learned during the production of these 3 videos, plus additional tips from many of my previous project videos. Here's a set of Wenge book matched side and back panels that were produced in this video series. For additional information and videos on the Accu-Slice system, please go to our website. And once again, thank you for watching this video. If you have any additional questions or concerns, please give us a call or drop us an email. We'd be glad to talk with you.